Hello. Today I will finally be reviewing the new Z-52. For those that aren't aware, of course, the old German DD reviews instantly became invalidated by Wargaming deciding to nerf these ships pretty much the day before their release. So all those tests we did as community contributors and such became completely invalid because the ships had changed. So I had finally unlocked this ship on my main account, and I've been playing it for a fair amount of time. I'd say I probably played, I don't know, 20 games on it or so. I've been testing various different builds, testing things that worked on the old build that obviously don't work anymore, and I've been trying to find the most efficient build that I could recommend to you, my viewers of course, because I like to know what I'm talking about. So ultimately, it's been pretty frustrating. I don't really agree, first of all, with the nerf. I understand that it was one of the great strengths of the ship was its ability to stealth fire, and they wanted to nerf that thing, or they want to nerf stealth fire in the future. But for some reason, they basically only nerfed it for this one line in particular, and not for anyone else. I mean, they might plan on doing it in the future, and they somehow preemptively nerfed this line in particular. But ultimately, it leaves this German DD line feeling, well, like the red-headed stepchild, like the black sheep in the family, like that one line that basically got screwed over because of some possible future plans that haven't really been announced or haven't been properly commented on or so forth. So I don't know. Regardless, let me start by showing one of the strengths of this ship. On maps like this where you can get a natural cover, for example, there's an island in the middle and it's domination. The hydroacoustic search, you get the German one, which of course is very strong. It's got a 5.9 km ship detection, which means of course in situations exactly like this where I'm able to spot all of these ships for my allies, it's incredibly strong. It's very strong. And being able to get into hydro range without being spotted is very potent. Now Tashkent, like Russian DDs, is actually so tanky that instead of just using HE, he stops here, so I decided to switch to AP. He's also angled a bit, which means my AP is going to do a lot of damage. Now, this AP is highly situational against DDs, which I learned quite quickly. There are some ships that eat massive AP damage and some ships where you just get overpens on. The Gearing, for example, is a ship that eats heavy AP damage, so you can use AP on that guy and you'll get massive volleys. You'll do 45k AP volleys on the Gearing and just wreck him. But then if you try to do the same thing on the Fletcher, because the Fletcher is a slimmer ship, suddenly all you're getting is overpens and you have to use the very weak HE, and if you get into a close combat fight with the Fletcher, he will probably absolutely shit on you because his DPM is so much better, unless of course you smoke and Hydra and so forth. And the Kaba, once again, the AP is great as long as he gives you broadside. If he angles even a bit, well, you're gonna be bouncing shells. I mean, if you have played the German cruisers, you know just how finicky the AP is, how you need to have very flat broadsides to be able to do something with the AP. Well, the German DDs are like an extreme version of this, where any sort of angling instantly invalidates all your damage, and they are extremely picky. You can do some great damage, but it's so situational that it's hard to rely on it in any way. DDs angling even slightly will just bounce your shells, straight up bounce, and then when they give you a broadside, unless they are these particular ships that are wide enough to actually give you normal penetrations, you'll instead get over penetrations. So I never really felt that confident taking on other DDs in fights in this thing, unless of course I had my Hydra plus smoke combination on, which of course allows you to spot them with Hydra and then smoke up to become invisible to give you the spotting advantage. In those situations, it's of course you can take on anyone, but if you don't have these consumables ready, very rough fights in general. That of course comes down to one of the major issues with this ship. It doesn't handle very well. It has a 700 meter turning circle. It's not quite as bad as the Kabarov 760, but it's still pretty damn big. It's also especially vulnerable to battleship AP. And that is a huge, huge issue, because battleships like shooting at you, and unlike the Khabarovsk, which is very, very fast and can use its great speed to actively maneuver away from these shells, you don't have that speed. You do 37.5, which is like, what, 1 knot faster than Fletcher? So yeah, you're not a speed demon like the Kabais. So you're going to be eating those battleship shells, and for some reason Wargaming decided that this ship needs to have that weakness, that extra additional extreme weakness to a battleship AP. So at times you'll just randomly hit a 10k volley from a battleship, and that means you end up playing a lot more safer, a lot more defensive, and you kind of end up playing like a scaredy cat, which is one of the things I've noticed with the ship. You just end up playing like a coward a lot, and there's not much else to it. You're kind of forced to do it because your HP pool is very deceiving. In other DDs, I'm fairly confident, like in how tanky I am, how much damage I can take when I have a certain amount of HP. But in this German DD, because of its large size and a special vulnerability to AP, even that of course includes cruiser AP as well, so they don't even need to switch to HE to wreck you. They can just shoot AP volley at you and you'll eat massive damage as well. This ship is actually much squishier than the HP pool it has would imply, so that's been quite frustrating on it. I did find a build that I ended up somewhat enjoying, which you can obviously see now. You see I'm launching torps again. That's because this build is stealth plus torpedo focused. The torps don't actually deal a lot of damage. In fact, there's the weakest, probably one of the weakest T10 torps. But they are fast and they have good stealth, so you can land quite a lot of them quite consistently. You only launch 8 of them, but they do 69 knots. But they only do 14.4k damage, which is of course far away from Shimakaze's 22k or 21k torps. But still, 14.4k, it's decent, but most of all you end up getting a lot of flooding, and when you run the module, the 3 million module, as well as the captain perk, you get the reload down to like 69 seconds, which of course for a T10 DD is pretty damn low. And when you run the concealment perk and such, you also get your concealment down to 6.4, and the torps themselves have a 10.5 km range, so you can very comfortably stealth torp, and you can stealth torp pretty often with this build. And this is the most fun build I've found for it, because you also retain your capture point viability, meaning you can push, because your Hydra has 5.9 km range, there's only a 500 meter buffer before you are within Hydra range of enemy DDs, so you can quite aggressively contest domination cap points with this ship, which is something I've enjoyed. So this build has ultimately been the most enjoyable build for me. On this, I've tried a variety of builds. I tried the 3x4 build that I of course run on my Khabarovsk, where I go AFT, Demolition Expert, and Survivability Expert. But once again, even though you get just as much HP as a Khabarovsk, you're nowhere near as tanky. You don't have the speed to actively avoid shells like the Kaba has, and your strange vulnerability to AP means that your HP pool is very, very deceiving. So the 3x4 build was not nearly as good as it's on the Kaba, not at all. Of course, not having nearly as strong HE doesn't help either, and the AP being as finicky as it is. Honestly, it's just a weird ship. It's just a really weird ship. And one of the biggest issues is, of course, this massive spotting range when you fire. That's the nerf they put into the ships right before they released them. You see that that white circle, that's my firing range. That other circle right next to it, that's my spotting range when I fire. So my spotting range is 14 kilometers in this ship, and that's with running Concealment Expert and running the module. So they really want you to be spotted by the entire goddamn map when you fire. And that makes it so frustrating to attempt to do any sort of like firing, like just attempting to use the guns in general is just so risky when you combine this this weakness to AP and this massive spotting range. Means that every time you fire you feel like you're taking this huge risk that you could potentially end your sailing career. So you play very safe, super safe. You don't want to take those risks because you have been punished so many times for taking them, and it just feels weird. One of my division mates called playing the Z-52 when he tried different builds. It was like trying to play the Shimakaze as a gunboat or trying to play the Khabarovsk as a torpedo boat. And that's kind of accurate. It's like it doesn't really fit the roles you're trying to put on it, but you have to put these roles on it anyway to just somehow try to make it work. The Shima, of course, I use HE. The HE damage is very, very weak, but I pop Hydra and Smoke, so that's why and of course I get help, but that's why I'm able to deal with him quite easily. And if it wasn't for this Hydra and Smoke, the ship would be so absolute goddamn garbage. Like, this would literally be such a garbage ship if it wasn't for the Hydra. And that's one of the issues, really. I feel like you give up too much for the hydroacoustic search on the ship. You give up so many things. You give up all your torpedo power. You give up so much gun power. I mean, here's actually an example. North Carolina gives me great broadside, and I get to shoot his superstructure. This is where you can get some, like, really, you get to see some potential damage. You saw that 5k AP volley? Holy crap, that's a lot of damage. But then as soon as he starts angling, suddenly your AP damage drops drastically. And it goes from, well, mostly bounces and 600 damage. All bounces, shattered shells, everything. So that huge inconsistency means that you can never really rely on the AP unless you get those really, really perfect broadsides. And the ship just isn't very fun to play. Most of the time when I play it, if you don't get max amount of value out of the hydroacoustic surge, you're stuck with this T10 DD that's pretty much worse than everyone else. The AP penetration is just so bad. I mean, I've had situations where one of my division mates plays Fletcher quite often. We sit in the same smoke and we shoot at the same broadside cruiser, and he talks about getting citadels and I just get normal penetration. So even a Fletcher, like German AP, is getting better penetration than you are in this T10 AP focused ship. So I don't actually think I've ever gotten a citadel in this ship. I think I need to go point blank to like something like a Mogami, probably, to be able to get those citadels, but you really just don't get them. The Khabarovsk, the Gearing, probably the Shimakaze will probably have an easier time getting citadels than this thing. It's like they were so afraid of making it overpowered that it made it laughably weak in some of the areas. So, is this a ship line that I recommend? No, not really. I can't see any reason why you would want to play this or any other. There's the gimmicky Hydro thing, but like, when I know about it and I face Z-52s, it's so very easy to avoid it. You see a Z-52 charge in, well, you start kiting away. That's all you need to do. And he has to smoke up, of course, because he gets spotted from the moon when he fires at you, and he can't dodge or evade or tank shells like you can in, for example, a Gearing or anything. And when he smokes up, all you need to do is smoke up yourself outside of his range. Or you don't even need to smoke up, you just need to wait, because German smokes last a much shorter while than any other smokes. They have a shorter duration than even Russian or Japanese smokes. So even a Shimakaze can outlast your smokes. So the smokes are pretty much garbage. So easily outlastable. So unless you get that value, as I said, out of that hydroacoustic surge, well, then you're gonna get outplayed. And I feel like right now most of these German DDs are enjoying a bit of a honeymoon period where people aren't that aware of the hydroacoustic surge and how powerful it is. And once people start learning about it, it's gonna get much rougher. Of course, there are still people who don't know how like hydro and things like this work, so they're always gonna be able to be punished by it. But ultimately, it's got this one gimmick, and that's pretty much it. Another thing is, of course, the anti-air. Wargaming made a big deal about proclaiming how these ships are supposed to have strong anti-air, and if you look at the values on the anti-air, it looks pretty decent. I mean, it's got some decent long range, decent medium range, but that's pretty much it. It's decent. I tried running full AA build. As I said, I've been experimenting with a lot of builds. I went with like 3 million upgrade for anti-air that increases it by 25% the damage on it. I went with full anti-air modules and full specs with AFT and manual AA and everything, and I tried it against bots like T10 carrier bots, and it was so bad. It was so terrible. This was a full AA focused build on the ship, and it was absolutely terrible. You didn't shoot. I barely shot down any planes, and if you don't run that build, in the default default version, just as anyone else would play the ship, you're still not have a good AA. Like, I even struggle to shoot down fighter planes left by other ships. In the Gearing or Fletcher, I just pop my defensive AA and I can burst them down. But in this thing, it just struggles. It doesn't have that strong anti-air they were advertising at all. In fact, the AA is nowhere near strong enough to like enjoy the label of being called strong. It's just very weak. That's pretty much it. It's weak. And this game that I showcased here, this was actually probably one of my better games. No, it was absolutely one of my better games. And I ended with 165k damage, 5 torp hits, 3 kills. Like this was what I consider a very good game in the Z-52. And now, as some of you know, I wouldn't consider this a very good game in any of my other DDs. Like, nowhere near a very good game. Base XP, I didn't top base XP. My division mate in the Yamato got the top XP. I mean, the XP is still decent, and looking at the damage wise, well, 50k from the torps, and almost the Wither, Fires and Flooding did the most. And the actual gun damage, as you look at it, I only did 60k with the main battery, 242 hits. So the gun power is so very, very weak. Anyway, let me move on to my recommended modules and the build that I ultimately found working the best for me. Alright, as usual, I'll start off with the modules. Now here's once again a really weird thing. These torps, usually you get like a flavor. You can decide like if the torps are gonna be faster but shorter range, or a longer range but slower. Like, you'll usually get a flavor to decide. But these torps are just a straight up upgrade. They are a straight up upgrade. It costs 30k. It makes no sense. So obviously get them. Smoke and repair priorities for premium consumables. Hydro if you can afford it. Speed boost if you really can afford to splurge like I can. Upgrade wise, main armaments mod 1. Aiming systems mod 1. I tried AA guns, but as I said, the AA doesn't justify it. It's not strong enough. It pretends to be strong, but it's actually not, so don't bother with it. Torpedo reload, I tried main battery mod 3, I tried the range mod, I tried them all, and ultimately the torpedoes are still your bread and butter and your most reliable tool, since you don't really want to be firing in this so-called gunboat. Propulsion mod, steering gears mod, because, well, you need to get your rudder shift to deal with already that pretty obnoxious turning circle. And finally, concealment system, because, well, you want to be able to actually use your hydroacoustic search. Captain perks wise, basic firing training, and followed up with last stand, superintendent, AFT, and concealment expert. Very similar, and of course finally we get torpedo reload and basics of survivability. 0.6.0 might bring some interesting builds to this that maybe might make it feel more viable, but ultimately the problem is the ship, not really the builds, because I've tried so many builds and the ship always feels like it's struggling to compete with the others, regardless of how you spec it. And ultimately, if someone were to ask me would I recommend this German line, no. Before the nerf, they had their stealth firing thing, which made them somewhat entertaining or somewhat exciting, that you could, the guns weren't very powerful, but at least you could stealth fire, so you had that additional source of something special, like it had its own thing. But now it's basically it's a pile of shit being held afloat by a strong hydroacoustic search. If it wasn't for the hydro, the ship would be such a catastrophe. Anyway, that was my Z-52 commentary. I hope you guys enjoyed it.